And now, friends, on this holy day, let us gather in peace and unity, as one before the grace and grandeur of life, as children before its great and loving mystery. In this hour, may we know anew the human joy of lives growing together, so that this hour will imbue all those to come with that same sacred gift. Come, let us worship together.
Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I'd like to invite the young and the young at heart forward for our wonder and wisdom story this morning. We have a couple of things in our wonder box, and I could use some help getting them out. Lyndon or Ansel, would either one of you like to open our wonder box first? Come on up. All right. Open our wonder box and you can choose one thing and see what's inside. All right, so we have a photograph of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Next person, who would like to come up? Okay, choose something. Can you describe it a little bit?
I think it's where they're trying to make like the world a better place because they're holding up signs.
Well, very good. I think it's something about making the world a better place because they are holding up signs.
Because white people believe they're better than black.
Because at one point in time, there were some white people that thought they were better than black people. So we're going to talk a little more about this one. I have two more volunteers, Nola Rose, and then I think I saw Orion's next. This one next. Can you want to tell me a little bit about this picture? It's okay if you want to pass. Okay, that's fine. So this one says, the Children's Crusade of 1963 boosts civil rights. And we have some young protesters and a police officer. And then I have one more thing, and Orion was the last hand I saw. And I do try my best to remember who goes each week. I try my best so everyone gets a chance. It's a book. What does it say on the front?
Holy trouble.
Yep. Yes, it says Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints, which has been an inspiration for our chapels recently. So I'll share a little bit about that too. So our story starts in the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and he was asking, what are we going to do? He was saying to his friends that were doing good works with him. Civil rights are about fairness. And as we talked about this before, not all people, not only then, are treated fairly by our laws, by our courts and judges, by our schools, by other institutions. And Martin Luther King Jr. was a thoughtful and intelligent, a courageous Black man who fought for civil rights. And at the time of our story, Reverend Dr. King was working to end segregation. So segregation is when people are kept apart by difference and told they can't sit in certain places, like on a bus or a train, or to shop in certain places, or to eat in certain restaurants, or go even to the same schools. And in 1963, many states in the southern part of the United States would not let people with darker colored skin, that's what they said was the difference, go to the same places or sit in the same seats of the bus with people with lighter colored skin, which also meant, in some cases, people with lighter colored skin weren't allowed to be in the same places with people with darker colored skin. And I think we can all agree that that isn't and wasn't fair. So Dr. King was in Birmingham, Alabama, one of the places that needed their help the most, the largest and most segregated cities in the South. And this was in May again of 1963, 60 years ago this spring. So Dr. King was holding big meetings at churches, and hundreds of people would come to hear him talk and hear about civil rights. But then not very many people at this time would come to the protest marches the next day. So a protest march looks a little bit like this picture, people either holding up signs or using their voices, saying that things like unjust laws or things when people are separated by difference are not fair. And so there were African American and Black adults and then white adults who joined or followed them. They were afraid of what might happen at the marches because things had happened before. And they knew the sheriff, a white man, in Birmingham was really mean. And he was very mean, particularly to people with Black and brown skin. Plus, they knew Dr. King had already gone to jail once for protesting. So they were scared because they didn't know what was going to happen at this protest that they were being called to do. And Dr. King was about ready to give up. And then something very surprising happened. At another meeting at the church, when he asked if anyone was willing to march with him and be willing to go to jail, a whole set of people stood up. And that whole set of people were children. Children who had been organized by a minister in the area. And I want to share this too, so we know of other people in the movement, by the Reverend James Bevel. And Dr. King thanked all the children, but said they could sit down. He really did not want to involve children in these actions. He didn't want them to go to jail. But the kids refused to not be a part of this. They were mostly African American and Black American children, and they did not like being treated differently because of their skin color, and they wanted to march for freedom. So eventually Dr. King came back and said, yes, they could march with him. And so those kids told their friends, and they told their friends, and they skipped school. Over 1,000 of them skipped school. They gathered at the 6th Street Baptist Church, and they marched down into downtown Birmingham. And as they approached the police lines, hundreds of those children were arrested, and they were taken to jail. So this may be part of what's happening here with the police officer. But the next day, hundreds of more children and adults gathered for another march. And the sheriff directed the local police and fire departments to stop that march by spraying them with fire hoses, hurting them with sticks, and even making dogs bite at them. It's hard to hear, right? But the kids helped protect each other, and they tried to keep their spirits up by singing together and praying together. And they arrested so many people in this protest that the jails were overfull, not just full, but more people in there than they were even supposed to be. So this is what happened when people all over country saw on their televisions. Now remember, this is before smartphones and YouTubes and some of the ways we instantly see it, but they saw it on their news, on their televisions. They saw children and adults being hurt. They were so upset that they also came together in ways, and leaders came together in ways And they started to make things fairer in Birmingham and in other towns and cities as well. And this action became known as the Children's Crusade, the Children's Crusade for Justice and Civil Rights. And again, I know this is not an easy story to hear because there are parts that are scary and there are parts that are sad. But the powerful thing is that those children stuck together and they believed in themselves, they believed in one another, and importantly, they believed in the rights that they were fighting for. I think the harder part of this story is that even today, there are people who are not treated fairly 60 years later because of difference. But we as Unitarian Universalists are congregations of open minds and helping hands and loving hearts. And we work with those most affected by injustice, and we try to make changes when people are not treated fairly. So there is a photograph in this book of Bayard Rustin. We're going to learn a little bit about him today as well in our children's chapel. He worked really closely with Dr. King. He is known as a holy troublemaker among King and others. And he once said, "We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers. Troublemakers for the higher good." So in our children's chapel today, we are going to explore what does it mean to be a holy or a good troublemaker, and all the ways that we can do that, because troublemaking is not just in protests. There are many different ways that we each can be part of troublemaking for goodness and justice and fairness. It's not easy. We make mistakes. But when things are really important, like civil rights and racial justice and LGBTQ+ rights, among others, we work and we try, because it's better to try, get something wrong, try again, and try again, and try again. That's so much better than not doing anything at all. And together, we are powerful. Like those students together in the Children's Crusade, they were powerful because they were together. So can we say we are powerful together? Because this community too, we may not be 1,000, but we are strong and mighty in our togetherness. We are powerful. You say that with me? Yes, I like this too. We are powerful. We are powerful. We are powerful. So we're going to be powerful together in our chapel. All ages are invited, but if our 5th through 8th graders in our Crossing Paths team, you experienced worship last week at First Baptist, you are very welcome if you would like to stay here in worship so you have a recent compare and contrast when you talk about your experiences at First Baptist next week. So it's your choice. It's all of your choices, but we would love to have you either in chapel, excuse me, or here in worship. And we will sing together as some of us depart now.
And our prayer this morning comes from the pen of Dr. King. Let us join together in the spirit of prayer. Oh God, we thank you for the fact that you have inspired people in all nations and in all cultures. We call you different names. Some call you Allah, some call you Elohim, some call you Jehovah, some call you Brahma, some call you the unmoved mover. But we know that these are all names for the one and the same God. Grant that we will follow you and become so committed to your way that we will be able to establish in our lives and in this world one family. That we will be able to establish here a world of understanding where people will live together as family and respect the dignity and worth of every human being. And here in the silence, we offer these, the prayers and meditations of our hearts. And may the light of love be with us this day and all those to come. Amen.
Back when I was in high school, a friend of mine came into class one day and told me that she had just heard an ancient Chinese curse, which sounded a little ominous to me, but I did want to hear more, and so she cursed me with these words: "May you live in interesting times." I think many of us have probably heard that phrase in the past. I later learned that the supposed origins of the curse were apocryphal, but it's still stuck with me ever since. When I was a teenager, the idea of living in interesting times sounded exciting. I grew up reading Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, where ordinary people were always getting thrust into the position of needing to save the world from some great evil. But this was a suburban Southern California town in the mid-2000s where the biggest event of the year was taking prom photos outside the Richard Nixon Library. Yeah. And the greatest evil facing our country, at least according to cable news, was Al-Qaeda. So in terms of saving humanity, there wasn't a lot for me personally to do. But I still wondered whether I would ever be as brave in the face of fear as the characters that I read about. Eventually, I moved away from home to go to college and ended up here in Princeton for grad school 11 years ago, where I finally got that test of courage I'd been waiting for. I started having panic attacks. I am sure I'm not the only former grad student in the room today, so you may be able to imagine why that environment would bring on all sorts of fears and anxieties for someone with a pretty conflict-avoidant personality. When I felt strongly about something, whether in one of my seminars or often outside of class in social situations, I found that I physically couldn't express my opinion. My throat would close up, and I knew from some embarrassing past experiences that if I even opened my mouth to try to speak, I would probably just start crying. The result was that I was rendered silent even when I wanted to speak out about something important to me. It was the worst possible timing, too, because boy, oh boy, were the times getting interesting. It was around 2016, we remember 2016, that I really started to understand the meaning of that curse. In the years since, it's felt sometimes like it's just been one horrible thing after another. The times are almost too interesting to bear. Now I'm a historian, I write, I work at a small Black history museum. I am very much not the chosen one, and that is fine. The power and influence I have is what all of us have, our voices and our willingness to speak up when we see injustice, even if we're reaching only a small group of people. But with my panic attacks, I felt like even that power had been stripped away from me. Now, I was happy to read in Dr. King's sermon, Antidotes for Fear, that he had a positive view of therapy and psychiatry, because I did go to therapy for my panic attacks. And I am pleased to say that today, most of the time anyway, I can talk to people about what I believe in without bursting into tears. That process showed me that a lot of the fear and anxiety I had been feeling was because some part of me deep down believed that I wasn't worthy of being heard. Quoting the New Testament, Dr. King said in his sermon that perfect love casts out fear. When I feel the impulse to speak out against injustice, it comes from a belief that I know we all share, that every person is worthy of love and compassion. What I've learned over the years, however, was that to cast out my own fear, I first needed to show myself that love and recognize that even if the actions in my power are small, they are worthy and I am worthy. Thank you.
And with that, we welcome Isabella Morales to the Worship Associate ranks. Isabella has offered so much to our congregation over the years with the music ministry. Thank you for adding this role as Worship Associate as well. It's great to have you on the team. Once a man was returning home at night from a long journey. As he walked under the light of only the moon and stars, he was startled to see a snake coiled up in the shadows on the side of the path. He was afraid of snakes in general and knew that poisonous snakes were common in this area, and so he stayed far away and waited for the snake to move. The snake remained coiled up though, and very still, like it could attack at any moment. The man grew restless of waiting though, and so he started throwing stones at the snake so that it would leave the path. The snake remained. He then moved on to sticks, throwing them at the snake. The snake remained. He then decided to make a lot of noise and dance around, keeping a safe distance from the snake, but trying to create the kind of ruckus that would scare the snake back into the forest. The snake remained. For hours, the snake remained where it was, while the man would try this and try that to scare the snake away. He prayed, he sang, he threw dirt at it, he stomped. He did everything he could think of as the long, dark night went on and on and on. Finally, the night turned into early dawn, and the man, by now exhausted and leaning against a tree, took another good look at the snake. In the gently increasing light, the man could see that the coiled snake, very still, always ready to attack, was in fact a coiled up length of rope, set carefully on the ground, probably for some later use by someone in the village. It was a tool, not a threat, something to use, not to fear. It was nothing like what he imagined it to be, nothing of which to be wary, and certainly nothing that could be frightened away with stones and sticks and prayer. It was just a rope, not a snake. There was nothing to fear. There never had been. This story is probably Hindu in origin, or at least that's the faith to which I've seen various versions most commonly attributed. And there are indeed many, many versions. It's become a widely varying parable used in sacred and secular work, from temple rituals to therapy sessions, from the academy to the altar. And it's often used to illustrate how we have to shine a light on what we fear. From a distance, perhaps, with well-being in mind, sure, but we can't turn from what we fear, seeking comfort in safety, for the fear then continues to clip our journey through life. Unexamined fear guides us. It stunts us. It keeps us acting irrationally and impulsively, while on the other hand, examined fear becomes something that we begin to have some agency over. We can at least name it. We can begin to know it, which is the beginning of disarming it. Naming the fear is a way to eventually overcome it. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. approached fear from a similar starting point in his sermon, Antidotes for Fear. This work is in his sermon collection titled Strength to Love, originally published in 1963. The book has 15 sermons. It's a little over 160 pages long, and my sense is that it's a lesser read book within his canon. It shouldn't be, though. It's prophetic, pastoral, theological, and immediately relevant in his day and in ours. Its wisdom easily endures because much of it is based on timeless insights. It shows his mind not only as an activist, but as a pastor, a scholar, and a practiced community leader. In this sermon, Antidotes for Fear begins with scripture, as all of his sermons do. And the one that guides this work is from 1 John and reads, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made in perfect love." That's an important line, for fear hath torment. Fear brings us torment, makes us miserable and small and reactive. 1 John is one of the many letters or epistles in the Christian scriptures, and it's mostly about two things: be wary of antichrists and God is love. Scholars think it was written in the 2nd century, although no one really knows, and they believe that generally it was written to guide and bolster up a group of emerging Christians who were being courted or coerced to convert back to the faith from which they came, or to a new one in the religious marketplace. Stay away from the tempters, the epistle says. Mostly when you read Antichrist in the Christian scriptures, you can sub in tempters and be on track. And then it says quite directly that God is love and that God's people are to love one another. And that if God's people practice love in action, not just in word or thought, but in deed, they will abide with God, which is to abide in love forever. The epistle says God's love is greater than our hearts, and is the love to which our own lives should be oriented, so that we can grow into a love greater than our own. Or as it sums up, God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. King believed as well that fear hath torment, and that love was an antidote for fear, but that there were also three other antidotes to employ. The first was to be honest about the fear, and then be courageous in the face of the fear, and then be loving in response to the fear, and then be faithful in a world of fear. Be honest, be courageous, be loving, and be faithful are the antidotes for fear that he preaches, and indeed that he lived. This book was published in 1963. By then, he was a well-known national civil rights leader. The Montgomery bus boycott had happened, and he had published Stride Toward Freedom about that movement. He had met with Nixon, Eisenhower, and Kennedy. He had been to India and met the prime minister. He had been arrested several times and had been stabbed at a book signing in Boston and assaulted by a neo-Nazi in Birmingham. He was, and he knew he was, a target for harassment and imprisonment by local, state, and federal officials, and of physical violence by people who hated what he worked for. He justly feared for his life and seemed aware that it would end prematurely. He would eventually come to preach this awareness more regularly in the years to come after the publication of this book. Indeed, his last sermon, I've Been to the Mountaintop, delivered on April 3rd, 1968, was one in which he acknowledged wanting to live a long life, but knowing that it was unlikely. And so he found peace with his fate because he had seen the glory of God and wasn't worried about what was to come. In his words, "And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." And then he ends the sermon. And that would be the last words he preached, for he would be murdered the next day. His final message was that he's not fearful. His final message was fear not. And he teaches us that to fear not, we first must be honest about what we fear, shine a light to it, put words to it, get a little closer to it if we need to, so that it's less mysterious and less powerful. Knowing the fear is the first step to disarming the fear. And to do that, we have to be courageous. Courage can be a learned quality. Yes, some people just seem to be naturally courageous, but it can also be something that is practiced and built up over time, like a muscle or a mindset. One can start with a little courage, writing down the thing that makes us fear and burning it, for example, and then move on to more direct and courageous experiences. The important thing is that we control them then. We name the fear and create the engagement. And then we are loving in response to the fear. We love the enemy, we love the snake, we love the opposition, we love without limits and radically. King was derided in his day for this approach. He is derided today sometimes for this approach. Each generation during King's life and after it voiced various levels of impatience with this approach, each seeming to think they're saying something that's never been said before. It's all been said before. It was said to him during his life. His approach was too accommodationist. It doesn't deconstruct enough. It's not radical enough. It's too optimistic. What about capitalism? What about militarism? What about poverty? He agreed with the identification of other ills and named himself as the three great ills of America: racism, materialism, and militarism. By materialism, he meant, among other things, the kind of poverty that results for many from the unfettered capitalism and greed of the upper class. And by militarism, he meant, among other things, defense budgets that directed resources away from the basic necessities of life and assured that war and conflict would not just occur, but be sought by those who profited from them. These were moral ills in America, and he knew that they were all linked. And by what would be the end of his life, he was preaching and leading against poverty and militarism as much, if not more, than he was just solely about racism. He was intersectional in his way before that was even a thing, not in today's expansive use of that term, but in an expanse that made sense in his context. He just believed that even in the face of all this, that love was still the most powerful force on earth. Love is what would cure all of these ills that we face. Hatred creates more hatred. Hatred empowers what we're working against. Hatred makes what we oppose stronger. Hatred serves the interests of what we are trying to weaken. Hatred may feel good, but it does us no favors and instead favors what we would end. Hatred is counterproductive, whereas love moves the needle, moves the middle, moves the heart to something closer to the kind of world we want to live in. Love is creative and transformative. Hatred is stagnant and represents the status quo. Both are powerful, but love is stronger because love creates and doesn't destroy. Love builds and doesn't stunt. Think of someone who hates you or who really doesn't like you and the effect that that has on your well-being. Now think of someone who loves you no matter what and the effect that that has on your well-being. The state that is better for you is the state that is better for everyone. Or when you yourself love someone, how do you feel? And when you hate someone, how does that feel in your mind, in body, and soul? Hatred is poison and it's powerful, but for King, love was the cure, and it was even more powerful, and it was in fact what worked. More than the strategies of any of his detractors, love is what changed laws. Love is what opened doors. Love is what healed hearts. Love proved its power in a time when radical progressive societal reorganization happened. And that love's revolution is not complete, is a burden whenever we turn from love's command and toward an easy bittering and fearing of the other. Love is what then and now leads us to fear not. And in the scripture that guided King's sermon, there is no fear in love. Or in faith, which is King's final antidote to fear. To be honest about it, after being honest about fear, being courageous in the face of it, and being loving in response to it. He concludes with, be faithful in the face of fear. And he preaches about a congregant reminding him of this. Her name was Mother Pollard, and she was a fixture of his church. She's the one who, in her 70s and participating in the Montgomery bus boycott, was urged by Dr. King to just go ahead and take the bus. She was older, she had to take the bus to work. She had to get to work. It was too hard for her to not take the bus, so she should just take the bus. She declined, and her reply has rung through the ages when she said, my feet are tired, but my soul is rested. Her real first name is unknown. Her age is unknown, but those words are still known. And she witnessed him speak one night when he had been going through a particularly rough stretch of threats to him and his family. There had been an arrest and tense meetings about strategy and social justice. And he didn't talk about any of that, but when he spoke, it was clear to Mother Pollard that something was weighing on him. And she asked him what was wrong, and he sort of ducked the question, but she knew he was worried and fearful. And he writes that she told him that whatever it was, the people had his back, and that even if they didn't, God's going to take care of you. He wrote that when she said that, quote, everything in me quivered and quickened with the pulsing tremor of raw energy. He's talking about an energetic, life-affirming kind of faith that is the antidote to fear. And it was that reminder of faith that stayed with him, that assurance that in the end, the reign of love and justice would commence and all would be okay, and that he would never be truly alone. It was an expression of that fundamentally hopeful belief of the liberal church that through effort and sacrifice and service, love would bring people together and create communities ever more beloved. It was a relentlessly hopeful belief that racism could be overcome, and poverty and militarism and the many ills that we can name and link together today. They can all be overcome, never by hatred which strengthens them, but by love which transforms them. The faith he means is the faith in the good, in progress, in hearts softening and laws changing, in doors opening and captives going free and everyone going home, no longer fearful. The faith was in the good, in God, in love, coming to life in our words and deeds of forgiveness, of blessing, of grace. This faith is active and energizing, and with it, he helped orient a movement and a country toward a better, brighter, more optimistic day in which America more truly, but not completely, lives out its creeds. It was a faith that had the unmitigated audacity to envision even systemic racism, giving way to opportunity and fairness. A faith that believed that people could be that good and love could be that strong. A faith that could imagine even seemingly intractable racists striding into God's beloved community in peace and love. A faith that believed people could be that good and love could be that strong. And it was a faith in all of us to be better and to build that world of beauty and harmony, which can only happen if we imagine it together, believe in it together, and work to create it together. And in this, we truly have nothing to fear. For Mother Pollard's assurance is really one for all of us. I think that's why King included it in the book. In those pages, she preaches to the preacher, to us, and to everyone, God's going to take care of you. Love's going to take care of you. And held in the embrace of love, we can fear not and build a just world, one that honors King's legacy by building upon his work, and one that, in love and faith and through our deeds, blesses each and all without exception. May it be so, and amen. Friends, go forth grateful for the moments before you, the breath within you, the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of love and kindness. And go forth knowing that you are held always, and always with neighbor and stranger, by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.